Welcome back to So in the Know, a podcast that's dedicated to property and shared ownership. I'm your host, Sarah Ellis, and today we're going to be talking about something incredibly close to the heart: home ownership for people with disabilities. Now, today we're going to be exploring what support is available for individuals with additional needs who would love to own their own home. Having a disability that excludes you from paid employment shouldn't be a barrier to owning your own home or living the life that you want to live. And for parents or carers, we'll be exploring what secure tenure looks like for grown-up dependents who require ongoing support. Today's episode is about independence, inclusivity, and shared ownership. Thank you both for joining us on the show today. I really appreciate it. Now, David, I think it's natural that we start with you. You established My Safe Home. If you could just tell us a little bit about it, how it was set up and what it all means to you.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for inviting me today. Really appreciate it. David Abbey, director of My Safe Home, and taking you all the way back to 1997, I had a phone call from a chap called Nigel King, who'd just written a book. I didn't know that at the time, but he'd written a book called Home Ownership for People with Learning Disabilities. And the call was out of the blue, as I say, never knew him. And what he asked me on the phone was, did I have 200 or 300 hours of time to help people with disabilities to become homeowners? And he had no money to pay us, so there's not going to be a payment at all. And if we were successful, we'd change the lives of people with disabilities forever. And at that, he had me.
It's incredible.
Right, yeah, he had me. He had me in at go, if you like. So yes, effectively, I agreed to do that. And long story short, we worked with the Housing Corporation, which is now Homes England, a grant funding authority, and they put together a model to enable people with long-term disabilities to purchase a home of their own with shared ownership. And in meeting families and individuals at that initial meeting with the Housing Corporation, they're really clear what they wanted, and they wanted, that's the individuals themselves and parents and family members, wanted to have real choice about where they lived, who they lived with, and really, really important for them was security of tenure. Most of the housing options for people with disabilities at that time really revolved around them renting a property. And as you know, renting sometimes can be a little insecure. So that was what they wanted. The other thing they were very clear to put to the team was if they were looking at home ownership, they wanted access to mortgages. And if you've only got state disability benefits to live on, which is the types of people we're working with, then typically it's very, very difficult to get a mortgage. They wanted a mortgage that was affordable, sustainable, and available to people who only had state disability benefits to live on. So people with a disability who have earned income, earn 40, 50, 60,000 pounds a year, can have a traditional mortgage with that income and the disability income. So that's where My Safe Home was created, 1997, to help people who've only got state disability benefits to live on. And they need a long-term disability as well, so it's somebody who's probably going to have a lifelong disability. Yeah. And that's what we do at My Safe Home. We arrange those specialist mortgages to enable them to purchase a shared ownership home, to give them real choice.
So how does it work? Talk me through the journey. Someone comes to you, they want that support. What does that journey look like?
Right, so initially we need to make sure that they're on the appropriate benefits, and the benefits that we'd expect people with long-term disabilities to be on is probably the high levels of personal independence payment, employment support allowance, support group, or universal credit limited work capability related activity. And what that just means is that they've been assessed as having a disability, and DWP, Department of Works and Pensions, understands that disability such that they won't be expected to be looking for paid employment, because it's going to be very, very challenging for them to do that.
And there's a difference, isn't there? Because if you put it into Google, typically the thing that will come up is hold shared ownership. And there's a difference, isn't there? Because you can get standard mortgages that are outside of hold. How does that work?
Okay, so typically the mortgages that are outside of hold are a traditional mortgage, just a mortgage like you and I would have, and they will be assessed on that basis. So typically you'd need earned income to access a traditional mortgage. The mortgages that offer hold, home ownership for people with long-term disabilities and shared ownership, the specialist mortgages for people with disabilities are really based on their disability income alone. And so that's the income they'll get on a monthly basis, weekly basis, plus any benefits they may get as well because of their disabilities. And it's all of that makes up the whole package for a specialist mortgage for people with disabilities. And that's what we arrange.
And there is as well the need in some instances for ongoing support. What sort of ongoing support do you offer? Right,
so people with disabilities, it's really important that some of those disabilities can fall away, can be interrupted, and we're on hand throughout that journey of home ownership. So if there is a glitch on the state disability benefits and the rent doesn't get paid or the mortgage doesn't get paid, then we're there to unravel that, put it back into payment and get the arrears settled to enable them to just make sure that the home ownership is sustainable and they don't start. People worry, if you get a letter from the bank or building site and you've got a mortgage and it says your mortgage hasn't been paid this month by the state, you worry. So that's what we're there for, to make sure that we're there to make sure that that worry isn't such an issue.
And what would you say is the biggest misconception about home ownership for people with disabilities?
The biggest one is that they can't believe it's possible. Our first homeowner moved in 1999. They've been living in their own home for over a quarter of a century. So we know it's affordable, we know it's sustainable, and we know it works for people. But there's not a lot of people who know that. And that, when I say people, I'm talking about professionals as well.
Yeah.
So, mortgage brokers, you can, if you phone them up and say, my son he's 25, he doesn't have paid income, he's only got state disability benefit, he'd like to buy his own home. They'll say, well, he hasn't got 3 pay slips and a P60, so we can't afford it, we can't help you. But the reality is, it is possible. We've helped 1,600 people now achieve home ownership over, as I say, 26, 27 years.
That's incredible.
And so we know it works. It works. But we only provide the keys to people's homes. They still need to make sure if they need care and support, that is in place to enable them to have a quality of life that they deserve.
It's such wonderful work that you're doing, and it's wonderful that you've made this possible for so many people. But what can housing providers do to support the cause?
Oh, how long's the list? No, I think the biggest thing they can do is just let it be known in their material on the websites that it is possible.
Yeah,
it is possible. And you're going to hear from Malcolm, and he'll tell you how it's impacted on his life. So it is possible. That's a big thing for me. The second thing, it's something I've heard several times, and that is housing providers with their marketing material. And I understand why. But with the marketing material, they show an aspirational lifestyle with their properties, and rightly so. The homes are beautiful quality homes. But we never see people with disabilities in those pictures.
That's very true.
Yeah. So I think there's something about letting parents, family members know this is possible, and that person looks like my son, looks like my daughter, it looks like me, and I think that's really important. And I think those are 2 big things that you can do, really. And I suppose the third one, now I've got an opportunity to give you a third one, haven't I? So the third one is really just make sure that the mortgage brokers that work with the housing providers, that they understand it is possible. They may not do it, they may not offer specialist mortgages for people with disabilities, but it is possible, and they should at least guide people to those services to give them a chance like everybody else has a chance who's in paid employment.
Some great advice there, thank you. And it wouldn't be right about talking about this without talking about the lived experience. So Malcolm, your son Calum, he's achieved buying a property through shared ownership. Tell us a bit about Calum and how that journey was for you.
Okay. So let's start at the beginning. Calum is now 34. He's the third of our 3 children, so fortunately we had a couple of children to enable us to work out it wasn't our parenting that was the problem. But Calum had challenging behaviour almost from the start, and as he grew up it emerged that he had autism, fairly profound autism. He had a speech processing disability, which, imagine being in a foreign country. Well, his home country is a foreign country because although he can hear a pin drop, he can't unravel what people say. And then when he was 16 or thereabouts, he started having epileptic seizures, which is not uncommon in people with autism. And his seizures are what are called tonic-clonic, which in layman's terms, if he has one, the first thing you do is dial 999. This is not a trivial seizure. Now, fortunately, he sees someone who specialises in epilepsy in people with autism, and he's been seizure-free now for, I think it's about 14 years.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, so they've got the medication right. The medication came with some interesting challenges at the time because initially it made his behaviour more challenging, but his body seems to have adapted to that, and I think we can then get into the what role might housing have played a little bit down the story. When you've got a child like that, life is interesting, to put it mildly. You do end up apart from society. I mean, you only have to go to the supermarket, take your child has a meltdown, the judgmental looks of people who are saying, can't you control that child? Well, and it's interesting, I've heard it described by some people with autism that when they have their episodes, it is almost like an epileptic seizure.
Okay.
They lose control, and some people who advocate say, well, you wouldn't criticise somebody for having an epileptic seizure. Why would you criticise somebody for having an autistic seizure? But the trouble is that the autistic seizure can come with behaviours that might involve lashing out at people that seem to be a threat, or all sorts of other things that become difficult for others to understand. So Calum went to an all-age special school, and he did okay there till he was 11. But then the school, and I was a governor of the school, so I actually supported this in principle. The school wanted secondary school for their children, a bit like the theme. They wanted it to be like other children going to secondary school. Mm. So when the people who were at the school that Calum was at were talking to their friends once they were 11, 12, they were following a timetable and they were having different subjects, most of which was completely inappropriate for Calum. So from then on, he was educated at home. We had a little bit of an interesting discussion or two with the local education authorities to get that to happen, which involved us introducing our lawyers to their lawyers. But by and large, by the time he was 15 or 16, he was enjoying, I use the term loosely, a form of support in our house. He was living at home. This was all happening in our house, where tutors came in and helped him, and predominantly helped him with life skills. And life was still difficult. Let's make no bones about it. He could still have his, we call them flakies. Odd things could sort of set him off. Sometimes we didn't even know what had set him off, and that could involve him. At one point, he had a really vicious thumbnail, and he'd gouge people with it. And it was not very nice. And all the way through this, I think it's important to set a context that all the way through this, the advice we were getting from professionals was, you should expect that Calum is going to what my wife and I regarded as some form of institution.
Right.
And it's an institution where he would be looked after, and it would probably be a long way away from where we live. And subsequently, because this wasn't the case when Calum was 16, but subsequently stories of abuse that's happened at those sorts of places have emerged. But my wife and I, we never wanted that for him anyway.
No.
And we always had a concern that if the people who were working with Calum didn't get Calum, what could go wrong? Because his only form of communication was behaviour which other people would regard as aggressive. So we get to Calum being 14, and a process starts which is called transition. So when Calum is in his early 20s, he's going to, in fact I think 18 is the administrative thing, he's going to transition to adult services from the point of view of social care. And he becomes an adult, and he then is regarded as an individual, where up until the age of 18 he's regarded as our child and we're responsible for him. So transition and transition planning is part of the process to help navigate what happens at that quite sharp boundary in terms of how the systems regard Calum. And we had a couple of meetings, and then when Calum was 16, we as Calum's parents were invited to a presentation given by David Abbey, which means that I've known David for 18 years now, I reckon.
Okay.
Yeah. And the presentation was a more detailed exposition of what David said earlier, exactly how the scheme worked and who it was suitable for, who it might not work for. And at the time, we were looking at a situation where Calum would get to be 18, and then he'd go off to something called college, which was a residential setting, and that would prepare him to go and live in an institution. And we couldn't see a way out of that. It was sort of preordained, if you like. But then when we had heard David's presentation, we came out of the presentation. We said, well, that could really work for Calum, and it could work for in a number of ways. One of which is, instead of him having to undergo two transitions, both of which would be very stressful for him, he would only be undergoing one transition. And the other thing is, we could see how it could be made to work so he could live close to us.
Yeah.
And we felt that was, and history has proved us right, we felt that was very important from the point of view of us having a role and being able to keep some sort of oversight as to what was going on so that things didn't go wrong for him. So we fast forward. So every transition went on till Calum was 22. Because the local education authority continued to fund the provision that he was enjoying at our house in lieu of him going away to a residential college. And actually that was cheaper for them. I mean, the economics weren't the big factor, but the local authority, I think at that point, was saying, well, okay, this is costing a lot less than it otherwise would be. Yeah. Let's roll with it. And we got to be, Calum got to be 21, and then the local education authority said, well, next year we have to stop funding because Calum's reached an age where it's no longer appropriate for us to do that. And we had no argument with that. So we went to the next transmission meeting and said, right, well, what do we do now? We want to invoke this situation where Calum moves out into his own flat. And the social worker scratched their head and said, oh, I don't know. Which after 7 years of pre-planning, because we'd been saying all along, this is what we want to happen. You'd kind of hope it would be better than that. But what came out in the wash was we had to ask for a reassessment of Calum's needs. And the key point of that reassessment was that we couldn't cope with Calum any longer, which sounds a harsh way of putting it, but actually, if you think of, when we come to his epilepsy, one of the things that changed was up until he started having seizures, we'd hear a bump upstairs and it was just him dropping something, or from then up, from his first seizure, you hear a bump upstairs, you run upstairs with your heart in your mouth, because these seizures are not pleasant things to witness. And have you got to call 911? And it meant we were living in a sort of elevated level of stress.
I can imagine.
And the thing is, you're soldiering on with it, but it takes its toll. It takes its toll over years, months and years. That sort of thing takes its toll. So we said to the social worker, we need to do something. We need Calum to move out. And at that point, the social worker said, well, okay, you've said you want to do this My Safe Home thing. What's that involve? So I got in touch with David again. I mean, I'd said to him shortly after we'll be back. And so some fateful day, 12 or so years ago, I rang David and said, right, the social worker has said the process is going to involve a reassessment of Calum's needs, but also we've got to have confidence as to the so what's going to happen next. So can you come and do your bit? So David came and went through his formal process of assessing Calum, checking what benefits he was on, which fortunately he was on all the right benefits. And what came out of that was an approach through the hold scheme. So that would involve Calum buying his own flat or house, which had to be 2-bedroom because he has to have 24/7 supervision and care. So it had to be a 2-bedroomed home. And it could be bought on the open market with a part share in partnership with, was it Advanced Housing?
Advanced Housing, that's correct,
and Dudley Building Society. So they'd got a sort of fairly well assembled process. And we got to that point and they gave us a budget and said, go and find what you want and we'll buy it. And the problem was we live on what is now called the Elizabeth Line. And it was a period of property speculation where people were buying property in our area against it becoming more valuable because it was going to be easy to commute into London. And there was only one property that even fell within the budget, and that was completely unsuitable for Calum. So we were in a bit of a hole. And I'd like at this point to say that you work with David, he's always got your back. So I rang David up and said, this is not going to work. And he said, have you got any shared ownership properties round about you? And we actually had 2 blocks in the town. And I said, yes. He said, well, I think what you're going to have to do then is you're going to have to try and see if you can get Calum suitable property in one of those 2 blocks. And I didn't understand at the time, but it turns out that the way the grant monies are all piled, I mean, your listeners and stuff probably understand this far better than me, but the way this thing is all constructed, the money that the hold scheme puts in to enable Advance to do what it does, the housing association has benefited from some of that money, and it means that with the same amount of mortgage, Calum might have been able to buy a second owner, third owner property in a pre-existing development, and that was what happened. Through the summer of that year, I made a bit of my nuisance with your colleagues, and the colleagues from the other housing association that had the other block. But at the Christmas of the year we were talking about, I got a phone call from Resi, and they said there's somebody who's interested in a quick sale. And you've been ringing us every week for the last 3 months, so we thought of you. Thanks, that's much appreciated.
Good to hear.
And we went down. My wife and I went down. So we got the phone call on a Friday. We went down on the Saturday, and I think something else that was significant in this, because we'd done the work for the hold scheme, we'd actually got Calum a mortgage offer, a letter that's saying you've got them. And when we showed that to the vendor, I think that was the thing that clinched that we were ready to move quickly on Calum's behalf. And so I think the metrics were we saw the property in very late November or very early December, and we got the keys in February. So very quick transaction. A little bit of fun and games along the way, because we have to be Calum's Court of Protection appointed deputies for property and affairs. So we had to make a special application to the Court of Protection to be able to buy the property for Calum. And sometimes the Court of Protection apparently can be a bit slow.
Okay.
But we got lucky. We got a judge who knew what he was about, and we got our authorisation that we could act on his behalf in that regard, subject to the rest of it being
so
put in
that
place.
process is about sort of being Calum's voice in that respect.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what being his, so most people I think are familiar with lasting powers of attorney.
Yes.
Well, to grant a lasting power of attorney, you have to have capacity to appoint somebody. To be a deputy, the court has to appoint you because the person doesn't have capacity. And so we'd got that application going as part of all the things David had advised us to do, but we needed a special privilege to do something in advance of the process fully completing. And we made the argument that we had to do it this quickly. We couldn't wait for the court because it was so unusual for a suitable property to be available. And so it was a good combination of
good
circumstances.
timing then,
yeah,
I guess.
And I'm a big user of the phrase, which I think is attributed to one of the golfers, that the harder you work, the luckier you get. So yeah, we put a lot of effort into getting, and David and his team put a lot of effort into getting Calum to this point. But because we got him to that point and we'd done the hard work, we got the keys. So that was 11 years ago next month.
Okay. And what does that independent living mean to Calum?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, at the point at which Calum moved into the flat, he'd got horrendous problems with his diet, but they also meant he had severe problems with his bowels. That would be too graphic, but he had real problems in that regard. He could still be quite aggressive. He could lose it, even though we had procedures in place and processes that he understood that if it looked like he was going to lose it, we could intervene and he would understand, because you can't actually just ask him to stop, because his understanding goes out the window. His understanding of words goes out the window when he starts losing it. So that was something. I mean, he ate the same thing every day. He had toast for breakfast, a tuna fish bitter for lunch, and chicken nuggets and oven chips for tea. 7 days a week, exactly the same thing. And you couldn't take him anywhere except maybe to a Heritage Railway if there was a Thomas the Tank Engine steam day going, because if you showed him the stuff in advance, he knew where he was going, and he put up with a lot to enjoy that. So if we now go forward 11 years, this same person eats the most varied diet of anybody I know. I mean, when you've had to consult a dietitian about how many portions of fruit and veg is too many, like because he was eating 10 or 12 portions of fruit and veg a day, when a couple of his carers took him out as an experiment to, are you familiar with the World Buffet format?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, so you can choose any food from any style of cuisine you like. And so as an experiment, they took, which was no mean feat in itself, because he used to hate even going to the local coffee shop. So to take him to a busy place like that, and the first thing he chose was sushi. Okay, and that was probably after about 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, that sort of, just before COVID that happened. He doesn't have a problem with his bowels anymore. That's partly a bit of medication, but it's also the varied diet. And he enjoys a wide range of activities, which include, amongst other things, going out on trips on a boat on the river, going to concerts of all sorts. So we started off with him. He used to go to the cinema when he lived with us, to autistic-friendly screenings. He now goes to mainstream cinema. He goes to all manner of concerts, musicals in London he likes. But the one of the things I'm most proud of, he and I have been to several mainstream classical music concerts.
Oh, wonderful.
Now, if you think about the amount of behavioural control that's required for somebody to sit, I mean, he enjoys them and he puts up with the conventions, and he much prefers going to see the same orchestra doing a concert called Noisy Kids, where you can show your appreciation rather than have to sit there like that. But I mean, the changes are really significant and observable, and have been documented by his social worker and put in his annual reports. And actually, one of the things because he's had the same social worker for the last 10 years, and one of the things she's most pleased about was she did his annual review about 3 weeks ago, and Calum actually sat with her and talked to her only briefly, but the prospect of him doing anything like that, she would never have believed it. And she's known him long enough. She's seen the before and the after. Now, why is that? Well, one of the things we put it down to, because some of the changes that happened started happening before we weren't expecting anything like this. We were just trying to we were trying to make sure of some of the things that David was talking about. We wanted security of tenure, so that Calum didn't have to go through. I mean, was it Southern Cross, the old people's homes provider?
Okay.
They operated basically as a property business with a care organisation on the side, and they went spectacularly bust about 5 or 6 years ago, meaning that loads of old people were chucked out of their homes and had to go wherever was available because it was a crisis generated by the operator. And we didn't want anything like that. So we wanted security of tenure, and there were going to be some really serious barriers that if somebody wanted to move Calum from what he'd become used to, they were going to have to work at it. And security of tenure was the big one. We had to put an appropriate care programme in place. But one of the things I think made the big difference was you can live with people who love you dearly, but you have to compromise. You know, we had to compromise. We've got Calum with us, but Calum had to compromise as well. And one of the things which I think is related to his issues with speech and sound was he struggled when other people were making noises in the house. So what we were able to do in his flat is the carers are all briefed exactly the same. If Calum suddenly starts turning up the volume on his computer or his devices that he's listening to, have a look at what you're doing. Are you making an amount of noise? Have you got the telly turned? You're watching telly. Have you got the telly? Turn it down. This is his house. We're here to enable him to live his life. And so we think that had a big impact in terms of once he got used to the idea that this was actually his space, and it was quieter, and it's a really nice flat, and it has a good vibe, good feng shui, whatever you want to call it. That actually had a calming influence on him and reduced his stress levels. And along the way, as a result of doing this, I've become something called an expert by experience, advising the NHS.
Okay.
And so I've been involved in lots of other cases with people with autism, learning difficulties and challenging behaviours. And a lot of what happens with challenging behaviours is it's related to people always being in fight or flight mode. And so it doesn't require much. The term says it all. You're already stressed. Something makes you even more stressed. You try to run away, which is one form of challenging behaviour, or you hit somebody, which is fighting. If the overall levels of stress are reduced, that happens less and less. Now, we're now in a situation with Calum's care team where we are concerned that the process we had when he moved in the flat, which was how do we manage his challenging behaviour, it's been so long since anybody in the team has used it that they're becoming complacent. It's sort of, he's not like that anymore. Well, potentially he is, but it's happened so infrequently in the last 3, 4, 5 years because he's settled into his house. And he's living his life his way. And the results are evident in his behaviour.
So independence for Calum really has transformed his life.
And independence not only from independence, control of his own environment, control of his own destiny. If he wants to go out, he can ask somebody to go out, and he goes out. That sort of thing, and that we take a lot of those things for granted. I mean, my wife recently had an operation, and for a while she had to ask me to do things for her. Didn't like that much. And I think we're all the same. We don't like having to be dependent on other people. We like to be in control of our own destiny. Why should people with disabilities be any different?
Exactly. And I think we've got a photo of Calum that we're going to be sharing as well.
Yeah. So this is the one with him standing proudly by his jigsaw?
Yes. Tell us about the picture.
Okay. Well, Calum's... He does jigsaws. He's gone from it being something that we did as part of his education. He quite liked them, and they moved into being a bit of something we would do. Like if he couldn't go out, a rainy day, couldn't go out, let's get a jigsaw out. He'll enjoy doing that for an hour or two. But this Christmas that's just gone, he came to our house, and he stayed for a few days, which again was something that he when we moved him into his flat, he stayed in his flat for 5 or 6 years, never came home. So we got in his mind the idea that this was his flat. But he's now okay, he can come, and it's a bit like an emergency provision, or for special occasions he can come and he can stay at our house. So Christmas, his sister bought him a jigsaw. And on Christmas Day, after we'd had Christmas dinner, we started doing the jigsaw. It was all... fairly typical. We'd done things like that in years gone by, but on it's 1,000-piece jigsaw. You're not going to finish it in one session. So we tidied it away into one of these things you roll up, and the pieces were all in sorting trays and stuff. We tidied them all away because we got Boxing Day coming up. We had Boxing Day lunch, and I was cooking the Boxing Day lunch, so it's a kitchen diner. And Calum came in, and I looked at him, and hello, Calum, you all right? And went back to cooking. And I was expecting to go out back to go on the computer. And I was concentrating on what I was doing. I turned round about 5 minutes later, and he'd actually, of his own volition, he'd got the roll out, unrolled it on the table. He got all the sorting trays out, and he got the jigsaw, and we had to persuade him to put it away so we could eat. Then we got it out again, and he finished the jigsaw. And that was something that we'd never seen before, that he'd taken control. And because he's quite timid, he sort of is always looking for approval to do things. He'd felt confident enough. I want to do this. I'm not going to ask anybody to help me. I'm just going to get on and do it. And that when we were talking to his behaviour consultants about that is monumental. That's a complete sea change in behaviour against everything that he's learned the last 30 odd years. So yeah, it was, so we got I think you get some plastic backing sheet, put the jigsaw on that, and I put it up in his bedroom just before New Year, and took that picture to show to his mum. And he so can smile. He's got a beautiful smile, but what he won't do is he won't smile for the camera. He does some sort of gurning, but that was him being told to smile for the camera for his mum.
And what does getting those keys for Calum and having his own space as a parent, what does that mean to you?
I think it meant two major things for us. The first one was short-term relief from the pressure, because while he was living with us, but with the best will in the world, we can have care or we can have respite care. So on occasions we went away on holiday and we had people stay in our home to look after Calum when we weren't there. But normally you can have provision in the house so many hours a day, but then it's still you, and you've still got that responsibility. If there's the clunk in the bedroom, the adrenaline starts. All of those things I talked about earlier are there. And when he's in his own home with his own care arrangement, which is properly wrapped around him, wow. Yeah, and it's taken a while, and we're still actually quite heavily involved because we manage the team that look after Calum with the direct payments that the local authority provide us. But that's the first big one. But the second big one is effectively when we're gone or when we can't. There's two scenarios. One is we become too old and infirm to have a role. The other one is we just the proverbial bus. One day we're hit. And Calum now has resilience against the proverbial bus. And it's interesting that in terms of what David said, one of the things that made me so convinced and persuade my wife, who initially wasn't in favour, that we needed to do this. I had a conversation with the director of adult social care one time, and he said the worst thing that happened to him ever in his job was Friday evening, and he gets a call to be told that Mrs. Smith died, and he knows that Mrs. Smith is 75 and she has a 55-year-old daughter who has special needs learning disability, and he's got 2 hours to get on the phone to find any sort of provision for that person, for that daughter. And he knows it's not going to be suitable provision. Whereas we know Calum has suitable provision, and actually it doesn't matter what happens to us in that sense. He'd probably miss us, but he would carry on living his best life, whatever happens to us. And that's the long-term thing.
It's that peace of mind and that security of tenure.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And what advice could you give to other parents who are in the same position?
Well, talk to David, which I've done that several times, and I think David will, every once in a while, gets a call from somebody who says, "Oh, Malcolm Napier's told me to ring you." But I think, firstly, be aware it's an option. I know from the stuff that I do with the NHS and this expert by experience role, there are a lot of providers and people within the system who have their way of doing things. Very, very, very few of them are aware of the possibility of home ownership, the hold scheme, My Safe Home, being able to do things with benefits, shared ownership. And it was actually that was how I became involved in all of this, because it was the novelty, and they said, "Oh, if you can do that, come and give us some advice." So it is possible. It's not always straightforward. I mean, I think we alluded to earlier that I feel we got lucky, as well as working very hard. We got lucky, so you've got to be prepared it won't just fall into your lap. You've got to do some work for it. But the benefits, if you do that work, are potentially huge. Potentially, as Calum's story says.
Well, life-changing.
Yeah, his life is completely different from what it was 15 years ago.
And he's clearly got some very supportive parents, so all credit to you, Malcolm.
Well, thank you.
And David, you as well, obviously.
I would say, though, that I've met I think I've been involved in about 120 other cases with the NHS, the majority of whom the parents are as committed and as supportive as we are. I mean, we're typical parents. So, there's nothing special about my wife and I in terms of what we've done. It's all possible. There's no brain surgery involved, no rocket science.
And David, I guess, how can people reach out to My Safe Home? And perhaps we could share some of the links on the podcast, but what's the best way? Yeah,
we're accessible on the phone, obviously, but just mysafehome.info. There's guides on there. There's testimonials and all the information and expertise that we've gathered over the last 27 years is there. What I would say to parents is just open your mind a little bit. Don't just assume because you've got a family member who's got complex needs may have very limited communication or capacity to even understand what a mortgage is. It is possible. Yes, you have to get instruments like lasting power of attorney or court-appointed protection, but it can be done. It is possible. And by getting those instruments early, when I say early, Malcolm mentioned transitioning at 18, 21. If you get those instruments in place at that age, then when the crisis comes or when the time comes to be considering housing options, those financial instruments, lasting power of attorney, court-appointed stewardship, which means that you can sign on behalf of your son or daughter or family member for the mortgage and for the deeds or the lease on the property, but it doesn't belong to you. The mortgage doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the person with a long-term disability. It's their name on the deeds, it's their name on the lease, it's their name on the mortgage.
It's their home.
It's their home, absolutely. So by getting those instruments, lasting power of attorney, court protection, getting those in place early, it means you haven't got to be scrambling around when there's a crisis. We have so many families approaching us almost as a last resort when they've tried everything else. We've got a family at the moment that we're working with, and unfortunately, the son has moved 7 times in 10 years. And this is somebody who's severely autistic, so they don't like change.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that person has to go through when there's a breakdown in the arrangements that's not working for them. And sometimes, as Malcolm said, they are many, many miles away from home. We have families who tell us their sons and daughters are so far away, they can't make the journey one day.
Yeah.
They have to go and visit, stop overnight in a hotel, and then come back home. I just can't imagine that for a family that's been so involved in the lives of their family members. So yes, it's possible. Sorry, Malcolm.
It's a point of detail, but things like benefits, I think it would be more helpful if you had to have the deputyship to do everything, because then it would be put in place early. But things like benefits can be paid. I think you can be an appointee. Everybody's got a different bit of jargon, and one of the things, I think I know my way through complex systems as a result of my job and career. But David has such a specialist knowledge of all the different aspects of what's involved, because it is quite complicated. And I think that one of their roles is in simplifying it and making it accessible, because even dealing with all the different agencies, they do things contrary-wise. One will do it one way and one will do it the opposite way, just to maximise the confusion, I think.
Yeah.
So I think just picking up on that point, sometimes I am critical of some of the agencies, but I was told a stat about 3 years ago, and that was for people who administer the benefit of universal credit, which is one of the benefits people get, they will see there's help people get towards their mortgage from the benefit system. It's called SMI, support for mortgage interest. And I was told the other day that a decision maker within universal credit will probably see an application for support for mortgage interest probably once in their working life on universal credit, once. And that's so when they see an application come through for somebody who's got some keys to say, the state's got to pay this, their first thing is,
why?
Panic. They've already got a mortgage. They're paying rent on a property. So how can I have a mortgage on there as well? Well, you and I know you can have rent and a mortgage on something called shared ownership. But so just that step, and they struggle with administrating that. So we've got the expertise internally who say, here it is in your manual. This is the chapters I know you've not looked at it before because you've never had to look at it before. This is where it sits. This is what you need to do. And then work with them, or sometimes with their senior managers, to help that go through. And that's after they've got the keys. So they've got the keys, which has been a journey and a half anyway.
Yeah.
Now you've got to get all the benefits into play to make sure it's affordable and sustainable for that individual. So it's not just getting the keys. We go beyond that. And that's families who told us about that, by the way. I can't even say that was something I thought about in 97. We thought, we'll get you the keys, happy days, you just go ahead and carry on. But the reality is, a year into that, they said, no, David, no, just getting the keys is not good enough. You need to be there to help us get the benefits into play because it's so difficult. So that's part of what we do.
And it's really wonderful to see that the work you're doing and the lives that you're supporting, and how you've helped Malcolm and Calum.
Well, and still helps. I mean, that point is, as it happens, we've got something where David's team are helping us a little bit at the moment, just sort out a little. But we're talking here about something that runs for a person's lifetime. I mean, if Calum has a normal life expectancy, we're talking here about 45, 50 years of a mortgage, because it never gets paid off. And in that time, government rearranges benefits, it changes policies, other things happen, financial institutions like banks and building societies come and go. And some of those things trigger changes, which normally as the owner you navigate your way through, but because this is slightly more complicated, some of those changes can be quite significant, and therefore knowing you can go back and get the advice as to what to do in this situation, this new situation, it's another layer of confidence that hopefully you don't have to, but we've had to use it twice now. So in 10 years, so every 5 years there's probably a phone call coming. That's a beat rate of government changing things. And
that's it. The ongoing support is essential. But thank you, and I hope that Calum enjoys his home and sounds like he's absolutely thriving.
Yeah, he's living the life of Riley.
So thank you for sharing your work and your stories. Thanks for joining us on the show, and thank you to our listeners. Now, if you or someone you know has a disability and would love to own their own home, or you're a parent or a carer looking for that long-term support, I hope that this episode has provided a practical starting point for you. Now, please do follow, subscribe. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Or please drop us a comment if you have any questions or you'd like to leave your thoughts. Until next time, this is So in the Know.